Hello, Teddy. Welcome. Say hello to your friends. Do you have any advice for them? They're looking for advice about training. Advice that doesn't include sleeping for 20 hours a day and harassing your brother for having the temerity to hug his mom. Get your butt out of everybody's face. Why, hello there, endurance nerds. Welcome to the part of the internet where outdated training advice comes to get euthanized. Today, we're talking about the kind of guidance that just refuses to die. The stuff that gets passed around like it was found carved into a cave wall by the first Iron Man just because someone with a decent FTP and way too much confidence repeated it loudly enough.
I don't know how to put this, but I'm kind of a big deal.
If you've ever felt plateaued, burnt out, or stuck in a cycle of doing more and getting less, these could potentially be why. These ideas sound smart, they feel safe, and have just enough truth to survive, but they're dragging your performance down like an anchor made of ego and nostalgia. So, join me as I rant about my lack of patience with training myths that should be buried next to toe cages and those little foam wedges that people used to call minimalist running shoes. The first myth on the docket, and one that really chaps my ass, is fasted workouts are the best way to burn fat. They're the best way to make your session feel like shit and still end up eating more later. Fasted workouts increase fat oxidation during exercise, sure, but oxidizing fat during a session is not the same as reducing body fat. That's just basic physiology. I'm going to really get into those mechanisms of fat loss and weight loss in a forthcoming video, but what actually matters is your overall energy balance. And guess what? Undereating in the morning session often leads to compensatory eating or behaviors later in the day. Your body will try to get those calories back. You did not outsmart your metabolism. It's pay me now or pay me later. And because fasted workouts raise cortisol levels, you're also putting a nice dent in your recovery and possibly interfering with sleep just to feel a little holier than thou while working at 60% effort. If you're doing them as a deliberate tool, there can be value there. I've talked about the benefits of metabolic flexibility, and they can certainly be a strategy for those of you who work out really early in the morning and need to avoid that GI distress, but you're typically preparing for this in other ways, like glycogen replenishment the night before, refueling immediately thereafter, and so forth. But if you're doing fasted sessions because you think they're the panacea of weight loss, let's talk later. I have a bridge to sell you. But moving along, another one I still hear kicking around is you should always negative split your races. No, you shouldn't. You should pace your races based on the course, the distance, and whether your legs are built to close hard or just hang on. Negative splits can work in marathons, time trials, or other events where the name of the game is durability, but in those shorter events, like anything tactical, surgy, or front-loaded, you might get more out of the tank by leaning in early while your glycogen is still high and your muscle recruitment is at its best. I've seen all too many people laud holding back just to preserve that illusion of control. I feel like that's coloring inside the lines because somebody told you to. Plenty of strong amateur and elite athletes put up even or sometimes positive splits because they understand their physiology and the demands of their race. I cannot help but chuckle at the online threads that boast pacing that looks like this picture-perfect graph, but when it comes time to talk about their results, income deflection, gear, wind, fill in the excuse here. Your pacing strategy is about extracting the most from your system, even if that means gritting and barely hanging on through a brutal second half. Honestly, the negative split obsession is often more emotional and psychological than it is tactical. It's comforting. If you save that energy early, you do lower the risk of blowing up, and you could pretend that you could have gone faster. But let's not pretend that's racecraft rather than self-preservation. Negative splitting is absolutely the right strategy in a lot of cases. I'm not dismissing it completely. It's just one of those things that ends up being overprescribed and overgeneralized in what I see as a very intellectually lazy way. But next up, always fuel your workouts with simple sugars. Just no. Those of you who have watched my videos for a while know that I am absolutely relentless when it comes to the discussion about fueling. I've practically built a reputation on barking at all of you to stop undereating during those hard sessions. But the correct advice is sometimes fuel your workouts with simple sugars. Yes, you'll hear me bang the sugar drum for intensity. Don't be shy about intake if it's hard, long, or depleting. But you also don't need to fire up the carb hose for every 90-minute zone 2 cruise like you're prepping for a metabolic stress test. Carbs absolutely drive performance at moderate to high intensity, especially once you creep past threshold. But zone 2, that's where you're supposed to be nudging your fat metabolism along, not slamming it shut with a steady IV drip of glucose. You're asking your body to get better at using fat than actively preventing it from doing so. Explain that to me. And if I didn't make this abundantly clear from my derision towards the fasted session dogma, I am not saying don't eat. I'm saying match your fueling to the intensity. Zone 2 rides still benefit from calories, especially something low glycemic or mixed macro if you're out for more than an hour. Maybe even, wait for it, real food. There's a clear use case for aggressive intake when you're stacking load, handling big volume, or doing race-specific prep. But if you're popping gels during an hour-long recovery spin or your 4th endurance ride of the week, you're doing it wrong. You're so used to being topped off that the idea of mild fatigue sends you running for the nearest neon-colored sachet of slime. There's a line between supporting performance and babysitting your metabolism. Know where it is. Next on the docket is one that is way more polarizing than it really should be. Heart rate zones don't matter, just train by pace or power. In theory, this one feels obviously right. It corrects for the lag in heart rate readings, decoupling, or lack of fidelity between zones, especially at those higher intensities, and this would be great if you were a machine, but you're not. You're a biological system that responds to stress in real time, and sometimes that stress has absolutely nothing to do with how fast you're going or how hard you're pushing. Pace and power are an indication of mechanical stress. Heart rate will indicate the strain placed on your body. This distinction really matters. If your heart rate is unusually high for a given output or it won't come up when it should, don't always assume that's noise. While your outlier could be as simple as too much caffeine, your heart rate can also give you some critical information. It can be the first signal that you're dehydrated, you're overreaching, getting sick, or on the flip side, you're adapting to heat, you're on a breakthrough day. You get the point. Ignoring it means ignoring the very system that you're trying to train. I get why people like power and pace. I'm one of them. They're clean, objective metrics and generally the right ones around which your workouts should be structured. But leaning too heavily on them alone creates a blind spot big enough to derail an entire training block. You don't get points or precision if you're myopically focused on the stress metrics without knowing how to adjust based on strain. This can be a really complex topic, which is why so many people shy away from giving heart rate the appropriate weight in their training. I have a full video deep dive into heart rate that I'm going to link down below to keep us moving along here, but the bottom line is use all the tools. That's what they're there for. Now we're tickling on the edges of the sacred cow of nutrition. You have to slam protein immediately after every workout. You really don't. The whole idea came from resistance training circles and somehow leaked into endurance sports like osmosis through a shaker bottle. Yes, protein is important, but no, your gains won't vanish if you're not choking down 30 grams of powder in the parking lot before your upload hits Strava. For those long endurance sessions especially, the first order of business is not protein, it's carbohydrates. You've burned through your glycogen. That needs to be replaced if you want to recover well enough to train again tomorrow. Protein matters, but the idea that there's some magic 20-minute anabolic window before everything you did evaporates and your muscle will wilt away, leaving you a wet noodle in Lycra, that's marketing, not metabolism. Muscle protein synthesis stays elevated for hours post-exercise. You have time. Eat a balanced meal, preferably one that doesn't taste like vanilla drywall. But nutrition is another one of those dense topics that cannot be done justice simply by hand-waving away myths. I'm going to link my nutrition deep dive down below as well if you're interested and maybe you need some actionable strategies. But let's move along to the one that might hit you in the feels. You don't need strength training, just train on hills or do some low cadence work. This is just wishful thinking, not a training plan, and quite frankly, an epic amount of cope from endurance athletes that want to excuse the fact that they don't want to make time for strength work or are still clinging to that idea that an hour or two a week of strength training will make them too bulky. Honey, there are people who hit the gym for hours a day, mainlining creatine and 200 grams of protein daily, and would be lucky to lay down 10 pounds of mass in a year. You're going to be fine. But low cadence work and climbing still live squarely in that endurance bucket. They add load and enhance muscle recruitment for sure, but they are not building max strength. Specific to cyclists, they're not improving your bone density and definitely not doing much to stop muscle loss as you get older. In isolation, what that type of work is doing is asking your joints to work harder without actually giving you that benefit of real overload. Strength training, and by that I mean actual resistance training, it gives you something hills never will. Improved neuromuscular coordination, better force production, injury prevention, and a fighting chance against the slow creep of sarcopenia. 2 sessions a week are enough to move the needle. That's it. You don't need a fitness influencer alter ego. You need a barbell and a little bit of consistency. And no, lifting your bike onto your roof rack doesn't count. I already asked. Now, I wouldn't be a proper creator if I didn't prostrate myself for the YouTubey stuff. If this is the kind of training truth you didn't know you needed, hit the like button, subscribe, and maybe send it to someone who thinks that carb loading means fettuccine at 10 p.m. But here's another one that might shock you, and that's the premise that you need months of long base miles before any intensity. This myth is a relic from when cyclists especially were full-time training about 20 hours per week. If that's not you, and I'm gonna guess that it's not, you don't need to spend all winter just plodding along at 60% of threshold before you're allowed to do anything remotely hard. Now, there's a sliver of truth here, and that's what keeps this myth alive. Backing off intensity early in your base season can be smart, especially when you're carrying fatigue from racing or a long build. It gives your system a chance to reset, rebuild aerobic volume, and shift into a lower gear without grinding yourself into the floor. But dragging that out for months with zero intensity, that's how you end up peaking in June for your March race. You lose neuromuscular coordination, top-end sharpness, and your ability to change gears when it matters. Your aerobic base might look great on paper, but your legs won't know what to do with it. And more practically speaking, most of you watching this probably don't have the flexibility in your left to lay down the volume that would be sufficient to build that solid aerobic base without borrowing from zone 3 and above. This applies whether you are on 2 wheels or on 2 feet. For cyclists, that means more than just noodling around at 60% FTP until spring, and for runners, it means not spending 12 weeks jogging in zone 2 and pretending strength strides don't exist. Modern training models like reverse periodization, pyramidal, polarized, what have you, they all exist for a reason. You can develop aerobic capacity and keep the engine firing at the right time without living in a 6-hour endurance slog every single weekend. Unless you're prepping for a grand tour or a 100-mile, that kind of volume to intensity trade-off just doesn't make sense for most people. Don't think about your base training like eliminating intensity, but about managing it. Dragging out a pure base phase for months is usually just a way to feel productive without taking any risks. Now, this is yet another shameless plug for another nuanced topic. I'm going to link my base training video below for those who want to know a little bit more about what structuring a base phase should look like. Now, this myth is a fan favorite and maybe one of the most stubborn on this list, and that's you can't train for performance while losing weight. Sure you can. It just requires a little bit more thought than slashing calories and hoping for the best. Training in a deficit does affect recovery. It affects hormone balance and total output, but that doesn't mean performance gains are off the table. If you're smart about it, that means fueling your quality sessions, keeping your protein intake solid, prioritizing sleep, and actually paying attention to how you're adapting, you can improve a lot of things, especially if you're starting from a place where you've got meaningful body fat to lose. Power to weight is the obvious one, but you'll often see improvements in aerobic efficiency, movement mechanics, and overall energy balance because your body is carrying less dead weight around. That's not trivial. Where this falls apart is when people try to do everything at once. Huge calorie cuts, high volume, high intensity, no recovery, no margin for error. And then they wonder why they're exhausted, they're injured, or they're watching their threshold output crater. It's really not that complicated. It's just not casual. Manage the stress, fuel the work that matters, and stop treating weight loss like a crash course in self-destruction. You didn't put on the weight in a week and you're not going to lose it in one. Have the patience to maintain a modest calorie deficit, and you absolutely can have both. Now, this one might be a shock to you if you've been around and had me wave that nag finger at you about recovery, and that's you must take a full rest day every single week. Some athletes need it, and I would even argue most when you consider life stress, but others they really don't. A calendar doesn't know your fatigue level or your day-to-day stress load, only you do. Total rest can absolutely be helpful, but for many people, low-intensity movement actually improves their recovery by increasing their blood flow, reducing stiffness, and promoting parasympathetic nervous system activity. I find myself in this bucket. I'm often forced into those full rest days when travel days just don't leave enough time for me to sneak in a workout after dealing with flight delays, traffic, and that one hotel that doesn't have my room ready when I get there at 8 p.m. I always feel more flat and more tired the next day versus the days I can get in at least a half an hour of good activity. Now, to be clear, you should have at least one day that's considered a recovery day. We're talking easy spins, mobility work, a nice long walk, not 2 hours at zone 2 because it's easy. Now, in a perfect world, athletes would drop in those rest days routinely, but they would be based on cumulative fatigue, not a fixed interval. But it's way easier to plan around that traditional 7-day cycle. Just don't be dogmatic about it. If you treat every Monday like a holy day of inactivity, don't be surprised when your legs feel worse on Tuesday. Be willing to be flexible. Live a little. Most of this advice stuck around because it was easy to follow, easy to repeat, and didn't require much thinking. But that's a huge problem in endurance sport. The athletes who actually improve over time are not the ones that are following the templated rules. They're the ones that are paying attention, adjusting based on what's in front of them, not what someone said 5 seasons ago. So if something isn't working, stop defending it. Stop quoting your coach from 2009. Stop pretending it's part of your identity. Let go of the junk. Fix the training, and leave the outdated advice where it belongs, right next to your expired gels and the broken heart rate straps. But I know I left a lot of bad advice on the table. Let me know what bad advice you followed for too long or what you're still following. Like the video if you saw something that felt all too familiar, and subscribe if you want more unhinged, unmitigated sass in your feed. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.